The room was still clapping when my boss changed the slide. I had just closed the biggest deal our division had seen in 3 years. $9 million. Signed and delivered after 8 brutal months of work. The champagne was already open. People were laughing and shaking hands. My boss, Warren, stood at the front of the conference room smiling like a man who had won something he barely fought for. Then the screen changed. One number appeared. $22,000. I stared at it. My champagne flute felt suddenly heavy. Something cold crept through my chest because that number was not just wrong. It was insulting. Company policy guaranteed nearly 5 times that amount for any deal above $5 million. I had read the handbook more than once during the late nights I spent finishing what 3 other managers had already failed to do. The applause around me faded. A few people glanced sideways at me, unsure what expression to wear. I forced a smile. It felt like stretching a rubber band close to snapping. What? I asked quietly. Warren shrugged. Budget adjustments, he said. No explanation. No apology. But I had stopped listening. The celebration had just stopped feeling like mine. The silence that followed was the kind that feels louder than any noise. Someone from sales cleared his throat. Someone else suddenly became very interested in his phone. Nobody said the obvious thing. Nobody pointed out what every person in that room already knew. I had closed a $9 million contract that saved the division's entire annual numbers. The deal had been falling apart before it reached my desk. 3 managers had tried and walked away. I had spent 8 months rebuilding trust with a client who no longer believed in us, restructuring the proposal from scratch, and answering emails at 2 in the morning when I should have been sleeping. The bonus just announced was barely bigger than what the company paid interns to relocate. Warren clapped me on the shoulder. Be grateful, Abigail. Deals like this build reputations. I looked at him. He was not uncomfortable. He was not apologizing. He was not even slightly embarrassed in front of 30 people. He was confident. Completely, calmly confident. Like a man who had done this exact thing before and never once been questioned. That was the moment something changed inside me. Not anger exactly. Something colder and more focused. Something that did not want to shout or make a scene. Something that wanted to understand. My name is Abigail Turner. Until that conference room moment, I had spent 7 years at Callaway Group, a mid-sized investment advisory firm in downtown Chicago, believing that hard work was its own protection. That if you delivered results better than anyone around you, fairness would eventually find you. That it was slow but reliable. I was the quiet one on the team. Not quiet from lack of confidence, but because I preferred results over noise. While other analysts spent energy being visible in meetings, I spent mine making sure the numbers were right and the client stayed happy. Before the Dawson account, I had closed 11 deals in 3 years. Nothing flashy. Mid-range contracts that kept the department running while louder people took credit for the direction. I was used to that arrangement. I understood how offices worked. The Dawson account was different. It was the kind of deal that could define a career. A $9 million advisory contract with a manufacturing group, burned by 2 previous firms. They were careful, slow, and deeply skeptical. Getting them to sign required patience, precision, and trust built one conversation at a time. I built it. And then Warren stood at the front of that room and quietly took it from me. After the meeting, the team moved to the open lounge for more champagne and catering. Everyone gathered around Warren. Not me. He retold the Dawson story like a man recounting his own adventure. The difficult client. The near collapse in month 3. The clever final proposal that had finally won them over. Every detail was real. I recognized every piece of it. What was missing was the person who had actually lived every moment of it. Each time someone congratulated him, he gestured loosely in my direction. Abigail helped with the numbers. Helped. Like I had proofread a document. Like 8 months of work, 2 client visits I had arranged personally, and dozens of rebuilt proposal drafts could be reduced to one forgettable word. Then a colleague named James asked the question that sank my stomach. Who built the final pricing model? That structure was really creative. Warren smiled without a pause. I pulled that together. A few late nights, but we got there. I stood still behind the group holding my glass. He had not written a single line of that pricing model. He was not just cutting my bonus. He was rewriting history. and everyone around him nodded along like it was the most natural thing in the world. That night I opened the internal compensation handbook on my laptop. I already knew the number, but seeing it in print made my pulse quicken all over again. The policy was clear. For any deal above $5 million, the lead analyst received a performance bonus of 1% of the full contract value. 1% of $9 million was $90,000. After deductions, my take-home should have been close to $85,000. Warren had announced $22,000. That gap was not a rounding error. It was not a tired accountant mistyping. Someone had made a deliberate choice to change that number, and that decision had to have left a mark somewhere in the system. I thought about the phrase Warren had used. Budget adjustments. It sat uncomfortably in my mind. The handbook gave no room for manager discretion on deals of this size. There was no override clause. No exception process written anywhere. There was, however, one department that controlled the compensation system entirely. Finance. And the more I thought about it, the clearer one thing became. If someone had gone in and changed that number, there had to be a record sitting in a system somewhere with a timestamp and a name attached. I just needed to ask the right question to the right person. The next morning I arrived early. I made coffee, sat at my desk, and opened a blank email. I spent 10 minutes choosing my words carefully. I did not want to sound emotional or accusatory. One wrong word and the entire conversation would shift from what Warren had done to how I had reacted. So I kept it to one simple question sent to payroll. Could you please confirm the bonus calculation formula used for the Dawson account? I hit send and waited. 20 minutes later a reply came back. The message was short and matter-of-fact. My manager had submitted a revised allocation sheet ahead of the bonus announcement. That sheet had been used as the official basis for my payout. Revised. I read that word 3 times. It meant the original sheet still existed somewhere in the system. It meant someone had gone in and changed something already recorded. It meant there was documentation of exactly what had happened, sitting on a finance server with timestamps and signatures attached to every single edit. I took a slow breath. This was not going to be my word against Warren's. There was already a paper trail waiting to be followed. Warren appeared at my desk that afternoon without any warning. I had not expected him to react so quickly. I had sent one polite email to payroll. I had copied no one. I had not said a word to any colleague, but within hours he already knew. He did not sit down. He stood slightly too close, the way people do when they want to remind you of the rank difference between you. I saw your email, he said. I kept my face neutral. Just checking the calculation, I replied. He smiled. A thin smile with no warmth behind it. You should be careful about escalating compensation questions. He delivered the word escalating like a warning dressed as advice. I had not escalated anything. I had asked one question to payroll. He leaned slightly forward. Ambitious analysts sometimes damage their own reputations without realizing it. He let that sit between us. Then he straightened, smoothed his jacket, and walked away. I sat very still after he left. He was not nervous yet. He was still in full control. Still certain that a well-placed word was enough to make a junior employee back down and disappear. He had done this before. Of that I was now completely certain. 2 days later finance sent a follow-up reply with an attachment. I had not expected it so quickly. The document was the manager allocation sheet for the Dawson account, pulled directly from the compensation system. My name was on it, but the number next to my name had been changed. The original entry showed 1%, the standard policy rate for any analyst closing a deal above $5 million. Over it, a second entry had been placed. The updated figure read 0.25%, a quarter of what policy required. Beside the change was an electronic signature. Warren's. No executive co-signature. No HR approval. No written justification. Just his login, his signature, and a timestamp showing the change had been entered 2 days before the bonus announcement. My hands felt cold as I read it again. This was not a budget adjustment. Real adjustments required written executive sign-off at least one level above the requesting manager. Nothing like that existed here. No note. No explanation attached. What there was one man's deliberate decision to redirect $70,000 away from the person who had earned every dollar of it. And he had done it so easily. Like it was nothing new to him at all. Something about the allocation sheet kept nagging at me long after I closed it. It was not just the change itself. It was how clean and practiced it looked. No hesitation. No sign he had worried about being caught. Warren had gone in, changed the number, signed it, and moved on. That kind of ease usually comes from doing something more than once. So I started looking. I pulled archived company celebration emails from the past 3 years. The kind sent whenever a major deal closed. Each one named the account, the contract value, and the analyst responsible. I matched those emails to the bonus announcements that followed. The pattern appeared slowly at first. Then it became impossible to ignore. Every significant deal above $5 million showed the same gap. Celebration emails praised analysts warmly. But the bonus announcements always came in lower than policy required. Sometimes by a small margin. Twice by a very significant one. Each individual dip was never dramatic enough to trigger a complaint. Always just small enough to be chalked up to taxes or some internal process the analyst did not fully understand. But lined up together side by side, the numbers told a completely different story. This had been going on for years, and nobody had ever once noticed. I was still working through what I had found when Mark stopped by my desk on a Tuesday afternoon. Mark was a senior analyst 2 years longer at the firm than me. He was steady and not the type to involve himself in other people's problems without a reason. When he pulled a chair close instead of just waving in passing, I knew he had something deliberate to say. "I heard about your bonus," he said quietly. "News travels," I replied carefully. He nodded. Then he looked at his hands like someone deciding whether to open a door kept shut for a long time. "That happened to me," he said, "after the Renfield account last year." I never said a word. A chill moved through me. "How much of a difference?" I asked. He exhaled. "About half. Half of what policy promised." I assumed there was some budget process I didn't understand. Nobody was talking, so I let it go. I stared at him. "Did the junior analyst on your deal get adjusted too?" He thought for a moment. "Same thing. She left the company 4 months later." He looked at me evenly. "Everyone just assumed it was normal," he said. I nodded slowly. But I was already thinking about what that meant across 4 years of closed deals. 3 weeks after my payroll email, a message landed in everyone's company inbox. I was eating lunch at my desk when the notification appeared. The subject line made me set my food down. Finance Department, Internal Compensation Review. I opened it immediately. The message was formal and measured. The Finance Department had flagged irregularities in bonus allocation records across several divisions. All managers who had submitted allocation modifications in the past 36 months were required to provide supporting documentation for every adjustment made. The request included written justification, executive-level approval signatures, and confirmation that each change complied with the current policy handbook. Deadline 2 weeks. I read the email 3 times. What had started as one quiet question to payroll had touched something far larger than I expected. I had not requested an audit. I had not filed a complaint or spoken to anyone in management. I had simply asked a question and followed a thread. But somewhere in finance, someone had been looking at the same numbers I had found. And they had not liked what they saw. I saved the email into a folder I had started the night I first opened the compensation handbook. I had a feeling I would need every document in it before this was over. Something changed about Warren the week the audit email went out. It was not obvious at first. He still walked the floor with the same posture. He still spoke in meetings with the same authority. But if you watched him closely enough, the small shifts were visible. He stopped telling the Dawson story entirely. For 3 weeks after the deal closed, it had been his favorite. At team lunches, during client calls, at Monday morning briefings. He had told it so many times I could have recited every word of it myself. Then it vanished from his vocabulary overnight. He also stopped mentioning my bonus. Before the audit notice, he had twice commented to colleagues that the adjustment was necessary and that I had accepted it maturely. Now he said nothing about any of it. But every time he passed my desk, his eyes moved toward me a fraction of a second longer than usual. Not angry. Not threatening. Calculating. Like a man who had always believed the floor beneath him was solid and had just, for the first time, felt it shift slightly. He was starting to wonder what I knew. I kept my expression steady and said nothing. There was still more to find. Finance scheduled individual interviews the week after the documentation deadline passed. The notice came through HR. A short calendar invite with no agenda. Just a time, a room number, and a name. Paula Reeves, Director of Compensation and Compliance. I arrived exactly on time. The temporary office finance had set up was a converted storage room on the 4th floor. Quiet, slightly too cold, the kind of space that told you immediately this was not a casual conversation. A whiteboard covered one wall with dates and account names. 2 monitors sat beside stacked folders on a folding table. Paula Reeves had reading glasses pushed up on her forehead and a calm, unhurried manner. She thanked me for coming and slid a folder across the table without any preamble. Inside was the allocation sheet I had already seen from payroll. My name. The altered percentage. Warren's electronic signature. She tapped it once with her pen. "Did you approve this change?" she asked. "No," I said. She wrote something down. That single word seemed to carry more weight in the room than I expected. Paula did not react dramatically. She simply noted it and moved her pen to the next item on her page. But something in the air between us shifted noticeably. Paula asked a second question without looking up. "Were you given any explanation for the adjustment before the announcement?" "No," I said again. Another note. She set her pen down and leaned back. She looked at me the way careful people do when the next thing they say genuinely matters. "Can you walk me through your role on the Dawson account from the beginning?" I did. Factual and chronological. I explained how the account reached me after 3 previous managers failed to retain the client's confidence. I described the proposal restructuring, the trust building process, the 2 client visits I had arranged personally, and the pricing model I had designed from scratch, the one that had ultimately secured the signature. Paula listened without interrupting once. When I finished, she looked at the folder again. Then she looked at me. "The proposal structure you just described, is that reflected in the documentation on file for the account?" "Yes," I said. "Every draft carries a timestamp and my login in the system." She wrote something longer this time. Then she leaned back once more. The numbers in front of her no longer looked like administrative errors. They looked completely deliberate. By the end of that week, the office felt different. The atmosphere had shifted the way weather shifts before a storm. Nothing dramatic yet. Just a quiet change in pressure that everyone could sense but nobody wanted to name out loud. Whispers had started. I caught pieces of conversations near the kitchen and the printer. Finance was reviewing 6 separate deals across 2 additional divisions. Multiple analysts had bonus percentages on file that did not match company policy. In every confirmed case, the adjustments traced back to manager-submitted allocation sheets. The same name appeared every time. Warren. But despite everything quietly unraveling around him, he kept walking in each morning with the same composed expression. He answered emails. He ran the Tuesday team call exactly as always. He acted like a man who had been through reviews before and come out clean. Either he genuinely believed he was untouchable, or he had not yet grasped what finance had already found. I watched him from across the open floor and thought about what Mark had told me. Everyone just assumed it was normal. Not this time. The numbers were on record. The pattern was documented. And now 2 different people in that building were looking at exactly the same picture. On a Thursday morning, HR sent a meeting notice to senior leadership. Closed door. No agenda. Managers were not included on the invite. I only knew because my colleague Denise in HR administration mentioned it briefly when we crossed paths near the elevators. She shared no details. She said only that the executive team was being briefed by finance, and that the session had been moved up from its original date. I returned to my desk and tried to focus on client work. But my attention kept drifting toward the glass-walled conference room at the far end of the floor, where figures were visible through the frosted lower panels. Warren walked past it at 11 that morning. Then again at 11:45. Each pass was slightly faster. He had his phone out both times, but his eyes were fixed on the conference room door. On the figures inside. On the meeting he had not been invited to attend. He could not hear what was being said on the other side of that glass. But he had spent enough years in this building to know what a closed executive session without managers present almost always meant. For the first time since the Dawson announcement, Warren did not look calm. He looked like a man calculating the distance to an exit. The following week, finance shared its preliminary findings with HR and the executive team. I was not in that meeting. 3 days later, Paula Reeves called me back to the fourth-floor office. She placed a new document on the table without any pleasantries. This one was longer than the first, covering multiple accounts across multiple years. "I want to show you something," she said. The document tracked every bonus adjustment Warren had submitted over the previous 4 years. In each case, analyst allocations had been reduced. Not eliminated, just trimmed. Shaved by amounts small enough that any single change could be explained away as a budget measure. But the money did not vanish. Paula pointed to a column on the right side of the page. The funds removed from analyst bonuses had been quietly redirected into the manager bonus pool. Small transfers each time. Careful and gradual. Spread across enough accounts that no individual adjustment would trigger a monitoring alert on its own. Over 4 years, the total exceeded $300,000. Taken from junior analysts who closed the deals. Funneled upward to the people who signed the paperwork. I sat with that number for a long moment. It had never been about budget adjustments. It had always been about taking. 2 days after my second meeting with Paula, Warren called an emergency team meeting. No advance notice. A calendar invite appeared at 8:47 for a 9 o'clock session. Mandatory for all analysts and associates. I arrived to find the team already seated in complete silence. Nobody was talking. The room had the tight, airless feeling of a space where something uncomfortable is coming and everyone already senses it. Warren stood at the front. He looked composed on the surface. His shirt pressed, his voice steady. But his hands were clasped together on the table in a way I had never seen before, and his eyes moved from face to face without settling on anyone longer than a second. He said there had been a misunderstanding with finance. He said certain historical compensation records had been flagged due to administrative inconsistencies. He said policies had evolved over the years and older allocation methods had sometimes conflicted with updated guidelines. He used the words accounting errors twice. He said policy confusion once. He never said my name. He never looked directly at me. When he finished and asked if anyone had questions, the room was completely silent. Not the kind of silence that means acceptance. The kind that means nobody believed a word. That night, just after 9, a new company email arrived. I was at home when my phone lit up. The sender was the Executive Communications Office. The subject line read, "Executive Compensation Investigation, Internal Notice." I set my cup down. The message was brief. The firm had initiated a formal internal investigation into compensation practices across 3 divisions. The review was being conducted jointly by finance, HR, and an external auditing partner. All employees were reminded that the firm's whistleblower protection policy fully covered anyone who provided information voluntarily. 3 manager names were listed in connection with the investigation. Warren's was first. I sat with my phone in my hands for a long moment. I thought about the afternoon the Dawson contract closed. The champagne. Warren smiling at the front of the room like a man who never once worried about anything. The slide changing to $22,000. The silence that filled the room afterward. I thought about Mark telling me that everyone just assumed it was normal. And I thought about every analyst before me who had worked their hardest, walked away with less than they were owed, and never understood why. This had never only been about my bonus. It never was. The next morning I arrived at my usual time. Warren's office was dark. Blinds open, lights off, chair empty. His computer screen was dark. His heavy black coffee mug, the one he brought in every day, was not on his desk. By 8:30, quiet conversations had started in clusters around the floor. Nobody made an announcement. But information moved through that office the way it always does in places where people pay attention to small details. HR had arrived before the building opened. Warren had been escorted out before most employees got in. By lunchtime, the official HR message came through. Warren had been placed on administrative leave pending the outcome of the investigation. The message thanked everyone for their patience and reminded staff the process was confidential. Finance had formally taken control of all compensation files across the 3 affected divisions. No manager could now approve or modify a bonus allocation without written sign-off from the director level and a finance co-signature. I read the message at my desk and then looked at Warren's empty office for a long, still moment. All those years of small, careful, practiced adjustments. In the end, it came down to one polite question sent to payroll. 2 weeks after Warren was walked out, I received a call from payroll. I was reviewing a client file when my desk phone rang. The woman introduced herself as part of the corrections team finance had assembled to work through the audit findings. She said they had completed the full recalculation for the Dawson account. Then she told me my corrected bonus figure. $92,300. She said it the way accountants say numbers. Plain. No drama. Like reading a line from a prepared report. I asked her to repeat it. She did. Same number. Same even voice. She explained the correction included a small administrative addition for the delay and the impact of receiving a lower amount at the original announcement. The full figure would reach my account within 5 business days. I thanked her and set the phone down. My hands were not unsteady because of the amount itself. $92,000 was meaningful and real. But that was not what made my breath catch for a moment after the call ended. It was what the number represented beyond itself. Someone had finally looked honestly at the truth and called it by its correct name. After 8 months of hard, quiet, unrewarded work, that meant more than any amount could. The firm released its internal findings 6 weeks after the investigation began. A summary went out to all employees through the Executive Communications Office. It was carefully worded, using measured language to convey facts without unnecessary drama. But even reading between the formal sentences, the picture it painted was impossible to soften. The investigation confirmed that bonus allocation records across 3 divisions had been systematically altered over 4 years. Analyst bonuses had been quietly reduced below the policy guaranteed rate in every confirmed case. The removed funds were redirected into manager bonus pools through incremental adjustments designed to avoid triggering financial monitoring alerts. The total amount improperly moved exceeded $300,000. All affected analysts would receive full corrected payments, including time-elapsed adjustments. Several management positions had been terminated. The report did not name individuals, but everyone in the building already knew who they were. New compensation controls were announced immediately. Every allocation modification above 5% now required dual approval from finance and HR. An anonymous reporting line was introduced for future concerns. The firm issued a direct acknowledgement that its junior analysts had been failed by the system designed to protect them. For everyone who had quietly accepted less than they earned and never understood why, it was a long time coming. A month after the report was released, the division head asked me to his office. His name was Frank Okafor, a tall, quiet man who listened far more than he spoke. He had joined the firm from a larger group in New York just under 2 years earlier. The investigation had clearly worn on him. He looked more tired than I remembered, but also more deliberate in every decision he made. He greeted me, closed the door, and sat down. "We did a full review of the Dawson account," he said. "Every document. Proposal drafts, client correspondence, internal records. Everything." I nodded. He slid a folder across the desk. Inside was a contract. Senior Deal Strategist. An executive track role reporting directly to the division head. The responsibilities included leading the firm's highest value accounts and, crucially, formal authority to review and approve analyst compensation on any deal above $3 million. I looked up at him. "The role was built in part because of what happened," he said. "We need someone who understands what these numbers mean and why honesty matters at every level." I looked at the contract once more. For the first time since watching that slide change to $22,000, I smiled. Not a forced smile. A real one. 6 months after accepting the new position, our division closed another major deal. The account was called the Morrow Group, a logistics firm based in Cincinnati that had been in discussions with us for almost a year. The analyst who drove the negotiation was a young woman named Priya Shankar, 26 years old, 2 years out of graduate school, and one of the sharpest people I had seen work a client relationship in all my time at the firm. She had spent 7 months on the Morrow account. Late evenings, canceled weekends, and a final proposal that took 4 complete rewrites before the client was satisfied. When the deal closed, we gathered in the same conference room. Same table. Same champagne. Same room full of colleagues. But this time I stood at the front. When the bonus slide appeared, the number showed exactly what company policy guaranteed. 1 full percent of the total contract value. Every dollar Priya had earned through 7 months of serious work. I watched her face when she read it. Her eyes went wide. She looked across the room at me, genuinely unsure whether to believe it was real. I held her gaze and nodded once. It was real. That moment meant more to me than any number I had ever seen in that building. Looking back, I have spent time trying to understand what the real lesson was. It would be easy to say the lesson was about speaking up, about refusing to stay quiet when someone takes from you, about not letting fear keep you silent when you know something is wrong. All of that matters. Every part is true. But the deeper lesson, the one that stayed with me long after the investigation closed, was something slightly different. Warren did not lose everything because I was brave or clever. He lost everything because arrogant people grow careless. He believed the people below him would stay quiet because they always had. He believed the system would protect him because it had before. He believed that as long as no single act was dramatic enough, the whole pattern would stay invisible. He forgot one thing. Truth leaves a paper trail. The altered spreadsheets. The missing approval signatures. The timestamps on every change he made. All of it sat in the finance system, perfectly preserved, waiting for someone to ask one simple question. I asked it. And that was enough. I stopped chasing recognition a long time ago. I just made sure the numbers were finally honest. And somehow, that turned out to be the most powerful position in the building.